Thank you so much. Melissa and I are so honored to be speaking with you all, and we're so grateful to you all for coming to the HSCSI Institute to share your wisdom and to interact with these lovely teacher participants that we have here. So Melissa and I prepared a couple questions for you that we thought might be of interest to our attendees, and then we're also going to open up at the end, about 15 minutes or so, questions from the audience. So as our lovely panelists are speaking, definitely be thinking about, your own curiosities, how you might bring these lessons into your classroom. Without further ado, one of the first things we wanted to touch on that Doug talked a little bit about, showed on the TWF site, was really the principles of the TWF organizing: self-determination, solidarity, community empowerment, democratic representation. So we wanted to ask you, why were these principles so central and so important to TWF? And could you give an example of what these principles looked like in practice? I can pass this magic mic over to anyone.
Okay. A couple of things before. I'm just really excited and happy to be here with you. I love ethnic studies teachers, and the high school level is super exciting, although I was in elementary, but nevertheless. And the second thing is, I'm hoping my camarada Vicky Wong will be here, because she and I just feed off of each other, and she's really essential for this conversation. But nevertheless, I will get started and just say that I pretty much, when I came here, I was not involved in the planning of the strike, except to vote to go on strike. And so the principles that have been discussed, I was not there when they were discussed, but I will tell you that those principles are so key, and were so key 55 years ago, and those same principles are still essential to different movements of today. I'll take it more from the personal perspective of what those principles meant. To me, in terms of self-determination, it meant that we as students were defining our vision of what life and academia should be here on the campus. And that was for a third world college. Community empowerment means that we were not just here for our own benefit, but also to start to address the needs of our community, and that we need to give back to our community, and that the community needs to be on campus, as well as the campus needs to go to the communities. Democratic representation and solidarity were key at that time, because if we wanted to win our strike, we needed these two principles, because we were a very diverse coalition. In practice, what that meant at the beginning, it was called Chicano Studies, is we had a representative group called a Mesa Directiva, and essentially it was a group made up of students, staff, and community people who made the decisions for us regarding curriculum, hiring, and funding. Some of the courses, such as a criminal justice class, emphasize community participation. And so the students that were involved in that went to, for example, Vacaville, the Pinto project there at the prison. We brought community people to campus. For example, Luis Valdez from the Teatro Campesino came and taught a course in theater. And we also felt that we needed to develop our own library so that we could start researching the resources that we needed for our curriculum, and also to document our struggles here on campus. And then TWLF students, as well as subsequent students, organized community movements in, for example, Oakland, where the Clínica de la Raza and Centro Legal de la Raza are still alive today. And those started in 1969. Harvey?
Yeah, I was just thinking of where a lot of these ideas came from, that because we were just students back then. And myself, I was undergrad when I entered Berkeley. The anti-war movement was full bloom. The Black Panther movement was emerging. Black Panthers, I think you could say they contributed a lot to this idea of Black studies, the need to know your history in order to know yourself and your community. They also were promoting themes such as serve the people, heart and soul. I went to Black Panther events. I went down to their office, did a little bit of volunteering. I went to anti-war marches. And I think all these things had a big influence on my understanding of what was wrong, that I was like super mad at what was happening with the war, the genocide in Vietnam and then you have what's going on today, in Palestine. So all these things kind of make you try to search for some solution or answer, And so I was pretty much open to that. So you could kind of say that the anti-war movement, the Black Power movement, the transition from civil rights to Black Power, all kind of put it in the hands of the younger generation that wanted to make change, And so I was still kind of figuring out what to do. And when this group, AAPA, formed, they were aligned with similar ideas that I had, and that I was no longer just an individual going from one event to another, but there was actually a program, this idea of self-determination, the idea of community engagement. I started doing community work, tutoring and all this stuff in Chinatown, San Francisco, learned a lot from that. I was also from the agricultural area too. I worked on a farm in the summers and stuff like that. So, but I think because of the fact that there was a uniqueness within Berkeley, because everybody came from all over the place, that we were able to kind of communicate, share information and stuff. There were activists in our group from Hong Kong, Taiwan. There were people from the Valley. There were people from Chinatown, the core areas, Filipinos, Korean, Chinese, and Japanese. I guess you'd say the four main Asian groups as a result of exclusion, But today you have like 29 different Asian groups, much more complex and much more challenging. Yeah, so I think it was just a period of figuring stuff out, and that idea looks good, self-determination, community engagement, that all looks good. But then when the strike actually happened and we were attacked, then we had to really figure things out, our strategies, how are we going to get support? We have to speak to the community, the churches, the schools, we have to go to the dormitories. And that's when we had to interact. And then we had to, from there, like, well, what are we about? Well, we had to develop our own classes or coursework. We were undergrads, not very many professors with us, just a few, like Professor Paul Takagi, who was in criminology, and he supported us fully. But then they went after him for supporting us. They got rid of his School of Criminology, which blamed crime on capitalism, that it was because of capitalism that crime existed primarily, So there's lots of things that we learned. We didn't have everything tapped down. We had to be teachers. We had to learn the materials on the run. We didn't have the books. Many of the books that we used were out of print. Carlos Bulasan, America's in the Heart. We had to go to the copy shop and make them, because you cannot get books like that, So I guess you could say it's just a beginning point, and from there that's where we're at today. Yeah.
First off, I want to say what a pleasure it is to be here. When I think about the journey, I'm getting ready to retire next year, and people ask me, well, how did you become a professor? I think my joke answer is Gladys Knight and the Pips weren't hiring. And so I had to figure this thing out. But the truth goes something like this. I grew up in a working class community. I grew up in Greensboro, North Carolina, which is where the sit-in phase of the modern civil rights movement started at A&T and Bennett College. And so I was a child of late Jim Crow. This is the way I describe myself to my students. And I think my journey has been one of constant learning. And I think I came to Berkeley in '73, but I came out of a smaller, in some ways even stranger environment called Duke. And when I was at Duke, it was essentially black and white. There were other students of color, but there were not numbers that would constitute sort of large organizations. So I was very active in African American, what was in Black student politics. But I think what's really fascinating to me is to think about all these ideas: self-determination, solidarity, democratic representation, and community empowerment. Because when I was at Duke, it was not just sort of thinking about, well, what do we need to do in the community of Durham, North Carolina. For example, most of the workers in the hospital were Black. They were non-union. And so there was this ongoing effort to unionize them. And that was something that radicals across the board organized around, and I was very active in that. I think I want to echo this whole anti-war issue. Very strong impetus in my own politicization, but in the politicization of virtually everyone I knew. And part of it grew from the reality that people of color, especially men of color, disproportionately fought and died in that war. And the whole idea, I think Harvey identifies this correctly, it was an imperialist war. I mean, it was a genocidal war. Millions of people died. And I don't think we've ever quite come to grips with that. And so, at the time, I didn't have all of this like worked out in my head. But like Harvey, I was very mad. And so just trying to figure some of these things out. And so when I got to Berkeley in '73, my mind was totally blown, because I remember meeting, people from all around the world doing all kinds of political work. And a lot of it started over here in Sparrow Plaza, because I was always up in there trying to figure out what's happening in the world. And then just coming to know students and professors across campus. So to me, thinking about something like solidarity, it was very clear to me very early on that allies and coalitions, especially among people of color, were essential. There's no way that you can try to move forward if you aren't struggling around those issues. And I don't want to make it sound like it's easy, because it's not easy. I mean, sometimes getting a bunch of Black people together and helping them decide what they want to do hard enough. And then you're trying to work across some of these other issues. It becomes, in some ways, it's all a struggle. That's the word I like to use. And then for me, the other issue that I think is very, very important, struggling around class issues, struggling around race issues, struggling around issues of gender and sexuality. But just Berkeley to me was this place where all that was happening. And over the course of my career, one of the totally fascinating things about all of this is I was trying to understand this, I think I've had at least a dozen students to write in-depth essays, undergraduate research theses on the Third World Liberation Front. They often start with Harvey because Harvey's a good friend. And so, but what they all are totally fascinated by, I think initially, is that students making history, students deciding that they can make a difference. How do you do that? And I agree with Harvey. There was no roadmap. There was no, but I think what for me was very important was having grown up in the community that I came out of, which had a strong civil rights, history, fight back, so sit-in movement in 1960. And when I graduated from high school, we had sort of like a major, I don't know what they call it. I think they call it an insurrection or something in my high school, in a local Black college, where they sent in the National Guard because we were acting up. And so that's the world out of which I came. And I want to end on this because I think this is something that students are constantly trying to work through. When I first got here, it was very clear to me that the Third World Liberation Front, Third World Liberation Unity, was a contested idea. And how do you, solidify this? And one of the things that really brought this home to me was the move of Black Studies to create a separate department, how and why that happened. And I was basically clueless, but what I came to understand was that a lot of the people that I knew were part of this. And so welcome, sister. Glad to see you.
How the hell did we pull off a stroke?
But and then how do you create within that sort of a functional sense of unity and the ongoing resonance and meaning of that today is something that I think is worthy of conversation. But while Vicki gets a rep, I want to give it to you, but I don't want to give it to you until you're ready for it.
No, go ahead.
But
Some water.
yeah, you want some water?
Yes. Thank you.
So the other piece of this that I want to emphasize is sort of long distance freedom fighters. This is the way I see us. It's like, as I have my granddaughter who's always trying to figure out, weren't you there when dinosaurs roamed the earth? Not quite, but just trying to understand freedom struggle, trying to think about the journey in perspective, trying to think about what the whole idea of the Third World meant in a post-World War II decolonizing reality, and how that catalyzed sort of the movement that I knew best, because it's the movement that I came out of, but how it also catalyzed the other movements that were part of the Third World struggle. So what I'm going to do is, whenever Vicki says you're ready, I'm going to give you this mic.
But have you guys got time?
Everybody
Yeah,
talks.
it's your turn.
And this is the first question?
Yeah.
Still?
Yes.
Yeah, we're just talking about sort of the principles: self-determination, solidarity, democratic representation, and community empowerment. And also, you might want to, Sister mentioned you as someone, you all have that call and response, reality based on your friendship. So she's already mentioned that. So, but you might can just talk about, how you got started and all of that.
Well, I don't want to. How long does this go to? I know you're all here from different parts.
We're hoping to turn to our lovely attendees around 12:20.
Okay.
So yeah, if you would like us to repeat the question, and then also Melissa can introduce you as well on the
Oh, yeah, because so sorry. I mean, apologies. The first thing that we would do in the third world college would tell people how to teach people how to read directions. It wasn't the writing of it, but I think in terms of this show, it's a self-determination to be able to determine your own destiny. I think you know how important that is to kids. And I just want to say again, this is my chance, because I don't have a lot of time here. This is my chance to thank. I think the main mentor in my life was one of you, a high school history teacher named Mr. Morgan. And if it weren't for him, I don't know, maybe eventually I would have found my way here, but he made such a difference in my life. And I think that you all have probably had experiences like that, if not personal, on your own personal level, with students and hopefully you will have. I'm sure you will have many, many of those, because relationships that you build with your students is even more important than the curriculum. We could have the best damn curriculum ever. I mean, if Newsom had a spine and he had passed the original model curriculum, that would be a big plus in our baggage, in our arsenal of what we're going to be teaching our kids. But he didn't, because he kowtowed, to the cowardly Zionists. So we'll get into that to another point. But my point is that teachers do make such a big difference in one's life. And I just had the good fortune, and I would take the opportunity, because I regret that I didn't have that chance to tell him in person, or his family, because they are all gone now, that his steadfastness, his dedication to the truth. He was a high school history teacher in Salinas, California, not the most sought after area to go teaching. And I spent most of my young life trying to get the hell out of there, growing up in the fields. So he was caught up, blacklisted during the McCarthy era. His history class was taken away from him, and he could only teach gym, which is not to deprecate the necessity for gym or PE. But when you're trained to teach history, I think you all know that's not where you want to be ending up with. And he did that for 10 long years. And when I finally got to high school at Salinas High, I was on that, experimental college track. So I got good grades, my parents are poor. And that was kind of like, so I was supposed to be in this history class with another professor, but I heard about Mr. Morgan, that he was actually, how word gets around on students, that he actually was the best teacher in the whole school. So I and my friend, we went and sat in, and we couldn't believe it. He was very quiet, but he started talking. He was talking about Malcolm X. He was talking about Vietnam. This is in the early 60s. Nobody was talking about any of those people, especially in Salinas. And he just opened up this whole world for me that I couldn't get in any other way. He didn't have a TV. We didn't have any books in our house. My parents couldn't afford books. We'd have to go to the library, and I'd start poring over all the magazines, the limited magazines they had there, to look at stuff that he was talking about. So this is, again, how what you do really opens someone's eyes up and opens their minds. And so he taught history for the first time, but they only let him teach what they called the dumbbell class, the ones that were supposedly doing shop and not destined for college and all of this. So our counselors had a fit when my friend and I said, no, we want to transfer to his class. And I was so happy I did, because it really opened up the whole world for me in terms of how I could see not myself. And I found my voice in his class, because I used to be really shy, even though people now would probably say, huh? They can't shut me up now. But back then, I couldn't, it was only when I could talk about other people that I started talking. And that's what he encouraged, that sense that we need to develop, because, this system of education has failed us. It's failed us the way that they teach the dominant, narrative out there. We'll get into that, I guess, in the later section. So I don't want to take up any more. I just want to say again, because I don't ever get this chance, you are my Mr. Morgans. You are the next Mr. Morgans in someone's life. So we're entrusted with a great task right now. You guys are all on the front lines of this battle. And it's such an important battle. It's one of the most important battles ever. You can see that. Would we be having hundreds of people, hundreds of thousands of people being killed right now in Gaza if we had implemented a third world college 55 years ago? And we had intelligent people, caring people in our government making up foreign policy? This is the difference that we all can make with ethnic studies, the kind of ethnic studies that we teach and we live every day. And we show as an example to our students, and our students can show us, just like our students are showing us now on those encampments. So I don't want to give any more time at this point. So
Yeah, Melissa can.
Thank you, Vicki. That was amazing. As you all have been stating, especially Vicki, with your response right now, in the 55 years since the birth of the TWF, we have seen gains like this one that's happening now, where ethnic studies is being initiated into the curriculum of high schools. We have seen rollbacks, as you have stated. One of the rollbacks was in 1999, where we were being refunded, and that's how this came about, the MCC, and we're seeing the palliation of it as well. One of the ways in which this has been done by the university has been carried out through the diversity, equity, belonging, justice work, with emphasis in multiculturalism. And so the question that we have here is, how do you understand this institutional approach, and how does it compare to the original demands of TWF?
I wrote my answer down very carefully because I have a lot to say. And I'm very critical and very cynical about anything that UC Berkeley says it's doing on behalf of people of color. The history that we lived here showed us over and over again how we were treated. First, the Academic Senate in March of '69 said, yes, they gave us the green light to have a third world college. Next thing we knew, it had been downgraded to what was called, and I'm not so sure who called it this, ethnic studies. Another thing that happened for the Chicano students, there was only about 50 of us that we knew that went on strike. I don't think there was many more on campus, honestly, and some additional Latino students on campus. But essentially, the chancellor had promised 50 slots for us in the fall of '69, and that didn't happen. So some of the students sat in the chancellor's office. There were other things that happened where I cannot trust this university. Everything is a struggle. Today, it is still a struggle. They splintered us off by separating African American studies into a department, and the others of us had a struggle, continue to struggle. And there was perpetual fighting over funding and other resources here on campus. There was no respect for the ethnic studies departments. And it included struggles with the current chancellor. And from my critical perspective, Berkeley became an HSI institution because of the money attached. And when I read a little bit about it, it was actually the chancellor who appointed all the members of the task force. So you can kind of think about that and what that meant. I actually kind of strong hate the term multiculturalism. In my experience as a teacher and as an administrator, it was a whitewashed, sanitized, non-threatening term, more like a kumbaya experience. if the university has now focused on this, and especially this emphasis on multiculturalism, I really want to know what that means for this campus. And if I don't know what the format is for how decisions are made and if there's committees, but if you're looking at the third world principles, and then there should be on these committees equal representation of students, staff, administrators, and community people. And also that they would have actual decision-making power. Relevant decisions that I personally think some of the focus should be on is a course requirement that all undergraduate students serve as tutors in the public schools for at least one semester. That there needs to be more outreach and teaching for potential teachers of color, because today white teachers make up 61% of the teaching profession. There needs to be more UC students of color. And Latinx students make up 56% of public high school students today. And when you include all students of color, we are 80%. More money needs to be given to ethnic studies. An example I pulled up last night that I wanted to share was that the Department of Scandinavian has, let me see how many, it's 8 professors teaching today, and Latinx Studies has 3. All teaching faculty and administrators, I believe, should be required to take an American culture class or an ethnic studies requirement. After all, 65% of the total California population are people of color. And another suggestion I have, I always have lots of suggestions, but another suggestion is that legislatively, UC Berkeley should push for ethnic studies to be taught beginning in preschool. It should be a part and an integral part of everyday curriculum from the babies on to the high schoolers.
Sometimes I get invited by DEI programs to talk about the strike and how ethnic studies got formed. I did talk about it to community orgs such as Asian Health Service. They wanted to provide this history to their staff. You know, they have like 500 doctors and nurses and community workers. That worked out fairly well. But there were other times, though, where I was asked to talk about this topic to corporations, and they wanted to see my PowerPoint first, and I usually get rejected. Yeah. So it kind of makes you leery of, what's the purpose of DEI programs and how that can be used to co-opt struggles or mislead people information-wise and stuff like that. And but in terms of Berkeley, I'd say that the programs that we do have, like this center, MCC, Multicultural Community Center, Center for Race and Gender, the American Cultures program, was all the result of student protests, massive numbers of students demanding change, And so I think you have to see it in this context, in terms of whatever exists, they'll try to whittle it away, and whatever we don't have, we have to struggle for. And that's what we have with regards to ethnic studies. I know that we kept saying third world college, and they kept saying ethnic studies, and then we kept striking for a third world college, and then it ended up with ethnic studies. Gary Okahiro wrote a book about how third world studies ended when ethnic studies was created, and so I thought that was a pretty important point there in terms of the origins of third world studies was anti-imperialism. It connected colonialism abroad with internal colonialism within the United States. And it's important to kind of keep that perspective about how all this stuff got started, but also the response of the system to whittle away, to downsize, and eventually kind of tear the heart out of the programs. It's always been an uphill battle. I've been here teaching for 22 years, and I see students super angry about the issues of their time, and their way of their outlet is they want a third world college. It comes up pretty much like every 10 years, and then the faculty has to deal with that. And oftentimes there's division between faculty and students over that, and then the students move on, and then there's another generation, and it comes up again. But I'd say that, yeah, DEI, I guess you could say, is a reform that always happens because of struggle, but also at the same time, there's a need for struggle. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sort of ambivalent about the terms multiculturalism. Well, I'm not ambivalent about what they did to our third world college and the ethnic studies. And also, most people don't realize, among the Asian Americans, we didn't ask for an Asian American Studies department. We asked for Asian Studies. And this is from someone who co-founded the first Asian American organization, the Asian American Political Alliance, which originated the term and concept of Asian American. Because we saw what the third world college was a whole, encompassing all the whole world, the whole history of why we're here in the first place, and the interconnections. I think studies is about connection, making the connection, helping the students, do the dots, connect the dots, making connections with each other, with their own students, with the teachers, with their communities. So all this criticism about how we're dividing and being exclusive, no, it's the opposite. So we have to learn how to use all that. So in terms of the terms, I'll stick to that because I'm already on the third question. This is in my mind, especially when I've been lost. So the thing is about the terms. It's important to have the terms, and it's important why every group had to redefine, rename, reclaim ourselves. That's why we got rid of the Oriental crap, which we never really called ourselves anyway. Just like the whole term Middle Eastern is a colonialist term. So we renamed, reclaimed ourselves as Asian Americans. They didn't give that to us. They didn't help us identify it in our schooling or anything. We did that. It's up to you guys to decide now what the new terms. And in terms of also expanding what Asian American means. I get it. At the time when we first started the Asian American Political Alliance, and it was part of the Third World, and the colorful world, and what was missing in that Third World Alliance was there was Black Power, definitely, the vanguard of the Third World Liberation Movement. And then you had the Brown Berets forming, not coincidentally in the same year that the Asian American Movement was founded, and the Black Panther Party had started, not coincidentally in Oakland and not in New York. That's a whole other thing geographically, why most of the movements started here in the Bay Area that we don't get credit for. But anyway, and also Native Americans had already formed several different organizations. What was missing in that Black, Brown, Red Liberation Front were the yellow people. well, I guess you could say the Vietnamese and the people in Southeast Asia were showing the way forward. But in terms of America, we came up with the Asian American Political Alliance. And our most popular button was one that said Yellow Peril, because that was what was used during World War II to denigrate Japanese. And the youth, I bet you all your students would get it. Youth got it, even though they weren't around during World War II. Even if they didn't want to join APA or care about APA, they wanted that button because it was badass to them. They knew exactly what we were doing when we reclaimed and put right side up with Yellow Peril. You thought we were Yellow Peril back then? Wait till you see us now. That's what they knew it was going to be. And that's why they came down on us. But then we got educated by our Filipino brothers and Asian Pacific Islanders. Hey, that excludes, a lot of other Asians because they don't see themselves as yellow. So later we extended that to Asian American Pacific Islanders. And now with West Asians and Arab Americans, that's a whole other. So each generation has to keep redefining and reclaiming your identities. We started, that part in terms of Asian American, but it's up to you to continue, to redefine. So you want to go, multicultural, that's a whole other thing. But in terms of what the Harvey and Clementine are talking about, how what we do have to watch for, and like self-determination again, is such a vital part of our movement in everything that we do, and that's why it was put on it's on our button. That was the main thing on our button was self-determination over everything else, because it showed us how things can go backwards really quickly if we don't always keep, on the lookout for all the sneaky things they do, because everything we want, we have won. The people have won it. And then they try to co-opt it. And then they send out their pimps and career opportunists who unfortunately are, I think we probably all have encounters with those types. But you know what? We still persevere because look at you. Look at this room. I've been really skeptical about the state of ethnic studies. When I left, after graduating, and that's the thing about students. That's the problem. It's the problem, but it's also, the blessing of students leave and they graduate and then they go on out, they leave the campus. So then you have to rely on the next group of students in terms of what happens on the campuses. So I just wanted to go work in the community. So I didn't know what was going on in ethnic studies or Asian American studies. And frankly, I didn't care that much, And I didn't realize the importance of how, to keep those, that we all feed on each other. But even with the watered down, and I think basically it has been extremely watered down, more in Berkeley than even some other campuses, look at you, you're all here. You're listening to us. You haven't thrown tomatoes at us. and it's like, it's still watered down. Ethnic studies still gets into our souls and our hearts, and it makes connections, and it sinks into our students. It gives them some kind of self-worth, and it makes them, it's still better than what we had, even in its really mixed state of affairs in some of the texts, man. And how they try to also, the same thing with computers and Microsoft engineers, how they try to make things more difficult than they are, and with all the jargon they come up with. That first time I came back to campus, and this grad students started babbling on about the paradigm of multiculturalism. I had to almost go puke. What the hell is he talking about? Is that what I was fighting for? Getting my head beaten up over so we could use words like paradigm and explain, to our grandmothers who are falling asleep and saying, what the hell did I waste my money sending you to college for? Talking about paradigms. Yeah, it's important. And I'm not saying academics doesn't have a place. But that is not the main thing. So to me, you could call it ethnic studies or whatever. It's what you do with it. It's the goal. It's the goal. That's the main thing that you always have to keep in front of you. Because your goal, the main goal, is what keeps you going. It's what keeps you working with opportunists. What keeps you working with the system and the man. Because we have to work with them. They're part of this world. I mean, you can't have a utopian ideal and go, off into the desert somewhere and construct, what you call a perfect society, because that's total BS. That's not going to help the people in Gaza or anywhere else if you go and do something like that. You have to work with the real world. And so it's our duty and our opportunity to arm our students with how to deal with the real world and to be able to make those distinctions. But what's important to fight over, you will get it to that point. I'm sure you all will, because you're on the front lines of it. And how to make those choices of what you really fight over and what okay, I got to put up with this, and how to deal with all those kind of things. The main goal, what is the main goal of ethnic studies? What is the main goal of it? Why do we call ourselves not just the Third World Group? We were the Third World Liberation Front. Liberation is the key. Liberation is our goal. Freedom from racism and oppression is our goal. All of this, what else doesn't matter. And if we put that in the forefront of what we do, then these other things can be worked out. You can work with other people you don't like. You can work with other people you disagree with. If you put that as your main goal, how do we best get that? How do we best achieve that? So in all of these things, if you're at work and you have a DEI thing, and then, it's the smartest thing to go off on it, but I think this is being used as a tool to keep us down. Well, yeah, objectively, you could probably say that in a lot of ways. But in other words, you could, like somebody in the workforce could actually learn to work with those people in that group of people and learn how to make the best of that situation. I'm not saying that that's always the best thing to do. There are sometimes when you have to draw the line. But anyway, I'm going to pass this on to Waldo.
Just 5 minutes.
I'd just like to put a point on some of the points that my amazing panelists have made. I'm an insider, okay? I'm a professor. And I think the critique is real. My experience is that this is a very conservative institution. I've served on many committees, and I've interacted with big muckamucks. A lot of what happens here is window dressing. A lot of it is in service of making sure that the alumni donations increase, that outside federal monies increase. But the idea of freedom and liberation is not something that the university is interested in. That's something that the people are interested in. So I think that's where that struggle is. It is very clear that the institutional imperatives of a place like Berkeley are very conservative. And what always amazes me is when people say you're at Berkeley. Wow. Yeah, but it is what it is. I don't see it as some beacon of radicalism, of some beacon of progressivism. It's fundamentally, like most educational institutions, fairly conservative. What I'd also like to emphasize, because you're teachers, in my experience, one of the ways to grab people is doing local community studies. Trying to figure out on the ground the histories of the people in your classroom, talking to auntie, uncle, grandma, grandpa, and trying to get them to understand sort of personal familial history and how that opens out. This is one of the ways I sort of came to history. But the whole idea of community studies, the whole idea of the personal and the political, how all these things fit together. So to me, projects that engage our students around the community, that engage them around family, that engage them around neighborhood, these kinds of things often mean a lot. The other thing that I want to say something about is, to me, the global and the international is absolutely imperative. Navel gazing in history is awful. You see a lot of it, you know. People take a little topic and they bite off a piece and then they dive deep and nobody cares, you know. But I think thinking conceptually, thinking broadly, thinking humanely, and thinking about other people and how you connect up, varieties of people in history. I think that's sort of the trend. You know, in our department, we have a lot of really amazing young people, and the work that is most exciting is very globalist, is very internationalist. It uses the local, the national to sort of like think in those ways. The last thing I want to say, and it fits in with all of this, is the whole George Floyd moment. Thinking about DEI, thinking about all of this, because all of a sudden the university found all these pots of money. Wasn't that over there? Okay, so, but you know, it's like, as an insider, what do you do? I'm in the department, say, we have blah, 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 thousands of dollars. And we decided we try to think about something that's been going on, for 50 years. Bringing more people of color into this sucker. How do you do that? So we reinvented the wheel again, and now we're interested in trying to think about how you bring more students of color into the professoriate. But that's been around since I was an undergraduate, you know. It's like, you know, how do we siphon this brother off so he don't go to law school and he goes to history? But to me, that's sort of, but if you're an insider, what you do is you figure out, well, what are the struggles that are worth, as Vicki said, you know, you're in here, you got to do something. You know, you have to try to make life palatable and meaningful, especially for the people around you. And so you pick up that struggle. The final thing I'll say about names, my daughters, who grew up in Berkeley, and are really citizens of the world. I mean, they have a totally, they call me the race man, you know, old Jim Crow dad. But you know, I think that shaped me, and I still have that. But what I try to get people to understand is that I remember being a Negro. Okay, I remember the day I became Black. I remember the day I became African American. And so, but my thing is, it's all a struggle, you know. And I welcome the idea, like Vicki said, we're trying to figure it out. You know, we're trying to name ourselves. We're trying to determine who we are. For too long, have others defined us, you know. And so, you know, whatever you want to be, you can be. But I do think that understanding that struggle of self-determination, self-definition, why it is important, who you see yourself as, and naming yourself up and naming yourself and standing up for that. I think all of that's very, very important. So I think we need to get to it.
Thank you so much. Melissa and I could talk to you guys and listen to you guys all day, and you know, the tensions that you're mentioning are definitely continuing into student organizing today. But I will say that that will to define what liberation is for students and for third world peoples also is consistent for today. So it's really heartening to hear. I'm going to defer to our moderators. I know that we've designed this institute to be so wonderfully interactive. I didn't know if we have time for one or two audience questions, but I know that we'll be transitioning into our lunch afterwards. But
so I think we can probably say that we have time for. Thank you. So I want to honor everybody's time and make sure that everyone knows that we intend to break for lunch. But if the folks on the panel wouldn't mind for like 5 more minutes of your time, and if we would impose 5 more minutes of folks because I'd love to give people here an opportunity to at least ask one question. I mean, we don't have a whole lot of time, but I've kind of set it up so that we can expect and accept non-closure. Yeah, if there's anybody who has like a burning question we have for our panel, I would love to give folks an opportunity. I saw this gentleman over here, then we can grab that one over here next. And thank you all. Sorry, there's totally not enough time for all the questions, I'm sure.
Thanks for being here. Recognizing that a majority of educators are white, teaching primarily students of color, what advice do you have for white teachers in ethnic studies?
I, as I mentioned earlier, I was on a board here in Albany, and I gave up, but teachers at the high school, they can't give up. No one can give up. So I would say to those teachers to not use your privilege of whiteness to make assumptions, to seek out allies, which would be teachers of color, to make alliances with the community. So many teachers I have found are afraid of parents, and they're such a wonderful resource. It's really the way you look at them and the way you treat them. So I would just say no assumptions made, and your students as well. So there's hope, and in my struggle, it was super hard, and it continues to be hard today. And I think we just have to have those hard conversations and continue to have them. And it's not about people being feelings hurt, but it's about daring to raise the issues and confront the struggles, because otherwise we're doing the whole just talk and no action.
I would say to read Howard Zinn, learn about John Brown, and the role of white people in liberation. I say those things are important, to be yourself, but also be open and have empathy, for others, but be as open-minded as possible, There was, I can recall a story of a student here at UC Berkeley who was involved in the strike. His name was Cordell Abercrombie, an African-American student who taught in the Pittsburgh school district. And he was kind of in a predicament because his teacher was white and didn't know how to relate to the majority Black and brown students. And so here you have the teacher consulting with Cordell, who was a member of the TWLF, as to how to teach students of color. That's what we're trying to do today. We're trying to figure out how to have that empathy and how to teach students of color, and to pretty much be yourself, with newfound knowledge and information. I'd say that's the best way to deal with that. Okay.
I'm trying to keep it short. I think the best thing is, again, Spartacus. Anybody know the story of Spartacus, the slave in Roman, and they made movies about it and TV series. But it's a true story. Spartacus was a white slave, a gladiator, one of the top gladiators during the Roman Empire. And he started, a revolution against the Roman Empire. That even though the short term wasn't successful since he got crucified and massacred, a few years later, they toppled the Roman Empire, the mighty Roman Empire, after how many centuries? And the slaves were multinational from all over the colonized people made into gladiators from the entire Roman Empire. It's an amazing story. It's one of our greatest stories in human history. And most people don't even know about it. It happened thousands of years ago. And this is something that really happened and shows that it can happen. And I don't care, some of the best fighter people I would go into, one of my best friends, Richard Oakey, had always said, the test is who you would take into a blind alley with you in terms of who you would most trust. I can tell you some of my white comrades would be among them, because I saw how they fought with us during the strike. And they were much out there and doing it for the right reasons more than some of our third world brothers and sisters. And the same goes for class. I know some people who only trust people who are from the working class. I'm from the working class. But hey, let me tell you, there are some people who put their lives out there. They could have been from the Rockefellers. And I would take them over somebody who's from a very poor family if they're like Clarence Thomas. So, you can't just go blindly on things like race and color. Again, the main judge is action. And that's what I go by in terms of judging character and who I would most stand with and what people do. It's not what you say, it's not your color of your skin, it's not, it's those people. And that's, again, where third world college and just education in general can help break down those barriers. And of course, that's not just to say that the main point for focus of ethnic studies should be on the most marginalized, because they have been the most downtrodden, and we need to reach out to those who are at the very bottom, because there is such a thing as white privilege. The other thing I'll just say to cut it short is arm yourself with facts. This is the other way to combat all those things. I know facts don't seem to matter in this world that's dominated by Fox News history as truth, but it does matter. Everything, we have to start from the truth. We have to start from reality. As a historian myself, you have to start from what really happened, the reality, and that's where you arm yourself with as many facts as possible. Because if they come at you about how we're being exclusionary and we don't, like this and we hate America and blah, 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 no, you come back at them. Hey, who are the people who were the first excluded as a race? Who did that? We didn't do that. Ethnic studies didn't do that. Who excluded the Chinese? Who excluded the Filipino? Who put Japanese into concentration camps because of their race and their nationality? That wasn't us. Those are the kind of facts you have to keep coming up with. Keep arming yourself with the truth, with the facts. Keep going and making sure your students start from that. They can't just say stuff crap, They have to start, even if those other people won't believe you or listen to you, you have to start from reality. That's your base. But you know what? Once you find that out, then you find these facts out. The fact that people have always resisted oppression. The masses of people have always resisted oppression and have banded together, despite race, despite their class backgrounds. You look at that. We found out when we were working on a book on Chinese working people, that contrary to popular thought back then, and that's before there was an ethnic studies or anything, the Chinese and Irish railroad workers had banded together to strike against the corporate, the railroad magnates. Did any of you know that before? We didn't know that, because that's not what they teach. We're always kept divided. No, we're the ones who are bringing people together. We're the ones who keep making the connections. That's what we do. And you can do that by the facts. You can look at these things and you can point it out to people, and you have to keep, arming and having the students feel that sense of pride when they discover the truth. That's again something Mr. Morgan had up and instilled in me to do, to not just even take his word for it, not to take my word for it, not to take your word for it. If they don't believe it, then go look it up yourself. So, anyway.
Professor Martin, will give you the last word.
Yeah, this is just a cherry on top. All of the above. Develop a spiritual practice. Be concerned about your mental health. Be concerned about your connections. Because you can't do any of this if you aren't strong in yourself, okay? And so what I urge you to do is take care of yourself. Self-care is fundamental to any kind of work. So, and spiritual practice is whatever, whatever centers you, whatever gives you sort of strength, and being concerned about your health, because if you're strong in yourself and you're in reasonably good health, then I think people will see you're a good person. And, good people make it. And one of my favorite things, I'll let it go with this, we're back in the day. One of my friends said, a black snake will kill you just as bad as a bite by a white snake, Or one of my other students, from one of my seminars, all skin folk ain't kin folk, And you sit up in there, everybody falling asleep. One of them said, all skin folk ain't kin folk. Oh, they piped up on that one. And then all of a sudden, all of my students were thinking about, well, what does this mean for me, in terms of my own understanding about stuff. So, and be open, Develop a spiritual practice, be open, and take care of yourself. And connect, And, all I can say is amen. I'm an old church guy. Amen, my brothers and my sisters up in here. It's like church for me. I don't know about y'all.
All right. Well, on that note, a round of applause for our panel, please. Thank you so much for joining us once again. And we sincerely appreciate you sharing your time. And I hate to cut us short. It's only because I want to make sure our friends in here will get lunch and be able to be energized what we have this afternoon. So again, thank you so much, all of you, for being here with us. We sincerely appreciate you taking the time. And before I turn the microphone over one last time, because I see Vicky, you have something to add. We just really want to remember. And I will say this. So we are going to break for lunch in a moment, and we're hoping that everyone will be back at 1:30 because we have a great activity in mind for all of you. Again, around centering art and rebellion and resistance and teaching that with our students. So joy, art, rebellion in ethnic studies is what we're aiming to talk about as we come back for lunch at 1:30. But yeah, everyone have a moment, and Vicky, I will please take it away.
I just have to say again, because I think that you are really on the front lines of the barricades. And I want you to know that the main thing that we're talking about, how to defend ethnic studies, that was one of the questions, and how to continue to go on in this. Really, you're in front of it because before it used to be, only on the college level, that they wanted to just kind of keep it up there in the higher education, clouds. But now that it's K through 12, you are in that first wave. So it depends on you, and we're behind you, but you are really the ones that are doing it every day. And the main thing that you have to have, and Clementine brought this up, I think, at the last meeting, is solidarity. Solidarity was the other thing that kept us going. And that means it's not just a frozen thing out there. It's something that you have to build. It's part of the struggle. It's something when you go out, like after the picket lines, we went out at night, we went to the frat houses, we went to the dorms, we went to the athletes, we went to the churches, we went to businesses to try to get their support. You have to keep widening the support base, and that means like talking to the parents too, because the wider you reach out, if you're ever in trouble, you'll be surprised at who supports you and if somebody is standing behind you. But if you don't reach out, they're not going to be there. So you have to be able, to realize that, and in doing that, you will make the best friendships and relationships that you've ever had. And if you don't, you still learn from it, because you will learn how to deal with people who disagree with you. And we all have to learn how to do that. And so these are things, the solidarity though, I think somebody had said to me before, I've heard, in terms of ethnic studies, they kind of put the initials ARC out there. What does it mean? A, access. R, relevance. C, community. But binding all of that together, and we will keep our faith in the fire, is solidarity. There's a reason why I think everyone relates to that song, Stand By Me. That's what your students want too. What does the student say? And I think it's been in studies. The main thing the students lose and need is a sense of hope, a sense that they have some control over their lives. We all want that. And that's what ethnic studies can also enable. It enables the best traditions in our cultures, in American history, and all of the world history. It actually taps into that. That's another argument about how actually ethnic studies will release all of that, because it shows the best. It's the best expression of liberty and justice for all. You think about that, and then you bring that solidarity, and we hold, when you look upon the sky, it seems to tumble and fall, and the mountains crumble to the sea. I won't be afraid. No, I won't be afraid if you'll stand by me. Stand by each other, and you will not be afraid of all the things ahead of you. And you will have people supporting you, and you will get the best out of your students and the community. So again, I just thank you again for taking this profession.
Thank you.
And carrying out what you really are representing that best part of us as well. Just know that whenever you get discouraged, and I know that will happen, just think of us. I'll leave you my email if anybody ever wants to contact me for any question.
All right, thank you so much. Thank you once again. A round of applause for Uncle. All right, and let's everybody break here, and we'll come back together as close as we can to 1:30. Thank you.